Hello. My name is Ginger, and I'm a senior in high school, and I'm going to show you guys the culmination of about 2 years of work, one of which is for my senior project class. So starting last year, I started researching and sewing historical gowns, mostly from France, just because I have a special connection to France. And I fell in love with the historical gown. So I started with the 1770s with my Antoinette, and then I dived further into research, and I actually spent 3 weeks in Paris in January last year before COVID hit, researching historical fashion as an independent study. So that was just a really incredible opportunity, and I'm really excited to share the culmination of all this hard work with all of you. So just a few notes before I start. If you would like to follow along with the voiceover, that's going to be in the description of this video. The link is at the bottom of the description, I'm pretty sure. Also, I just wanted to let you know that the shoes, hair, makeup, and jewelry is not historically accurate, though I did try to emulate the styles from the time. I wanted to focus on the clothing. Also, because of the limitations of Zoom, unfortunately, the quality of the video is not as perfect as I would hope. So after this is done, I will be putting in the description the link to the video without me on YouTube. And so if you want higher quality afterwards, you can go check that out. This will stay up afterwards as well, so you can pause at any time and come back to it. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to turn my video off so that you guys can see the video, and I hope you enjoy.
This gown was most popular in the 1770s until the French Revolution in 1789. A typical outfit started out with the undergarments, just as we do today. Women would wear knee-high stockings held up by ribbons, a shift, which is a simple underdress, and a corset known as stays in the 18th century. The hips are given structure by the paniers, French for baskets. Women would have pockets in their dresses as well, where they would often keep a fan for the stifling heat at court, smelling salts to revive them if they ever fainted, and perfume. Then, the under petticoat is secured, made of quilted fabric or cotton, to hide the lines from the panier's boning. This is a very warm layer, which is tough in summer, but provides much-needed warmth for women in winter. In general, women would wear 3 to 5 petticoats with most of these historical gowns, which is a quantity of under petticoats that I didn't have the time, the fabric, or the money to make. Finally, the petticoat, or our equivalent of a skirt, goes on bottom. This is followed by a top, a sort of jacket, that you lace up. This jacket, called the pet en l'air, is shorter. It doesn't have a train and was therefore worn as a day dress. Finally, you attach the stomacher to the dress, which hides the front lacing. Historically, women would pin their stomachers to their stays, which hinders mobility because of how temporary it is. While it's technically possible to put all these layers on by yourself, it's incredibly difficult and almost a workout in and of itself. The rich women who were forced to wear these gowns to follow the status quo, known as the etiquette, were dependent on help from servants or husbands to even get dressed or undressed. Imagine being so reliant on others. Because of that, it's important to note that working class women would wear clothes that were much more mobile. They did wear stays, the corset's precursor. However, they didn't tighten them that much, so they basically just provided back support. This day dress is known as the pet en l'air, which literally means fart in the air, because of the volume that the back pleating creates when it catches air currents. A pet en l'air with a longer train is referred to as a robe, a dress à la française. These gowns were worn for more formal or evening occasions, often at Versailles. It took me 55 hours to make all the layers of this dress. Nowadays, clothes don't discriminate as much based on wealth. Our modern equivalent to these gowns are designer items like Gucci or Prada. However, even if you can't afford real designer items, it's easy to find fake ones that look real. Back in the 1770s, however, you couldn't fake the 9 meters of fabric needed to make the back pleating of this dress. Clothes were a mark of social status, something that was almost impossible to fake. Not only could the majority of the population not afford this amount of fabric, but there were laws called sumptuary laws that prevented non-nobles from wearing certain colors or fabrics, like silk or brocade. Thus, fashion became a tool used by noble women to express wealth and gain power. I used a historically accurate thick brocade to make this dress. It was so difficult to work with and thick that I broke 3 needles while sewing it. Marie Antoinette hated the expensive, cumbersome gowns she had to wear at court. So whenever she went to her private estates, she wore lighter, simpler gowns that required less fabric. Marie Antoinette used fashion as a tool to rebel against the French nobility's traditions, and for that she was reviled. The peasants thought of her as frivolous for spending so much money on these dresses she was forced to wear, while the nobility hated her for trying to change the status quo. Also, textile manufacturers hated her for trying to simplify clothing, which would reduce their market. No matter what she did, Marie Antoinette was vilified for her clothes. Fashion ended up being one of the biggest weapons used against her by all parties involved in the French Revolution. Fashion imprisoned Marie Antoinette in her cage within the French monarchy. It comes as no surprise that in response to the French Revolution, clothes became simplified in order to allow the French nobility to blend in with the bourgeois class. Upper-class women also had increased mobility. Without cumbersome paniers, they could do things like walk through doors straight on. These are called empire-waisted dresses after their origin in Napoleon's empire from 1792 to the late 1810s. They are commonly referred to as Regency gowns, as they are worn in all of our favorite Jane Austen stories when England had a Prince Regent. I find it fascinating how dresses went from requiring insane amounts of fabric and structure to this simple silhouette. These dresses truly are a fashion anomaly provoked by the French Revolution and a scared nobility. The Empress Eugénie, renowned for her involvement in her husband Napoleon III's government and her trend-setting fashion, brought large yet lightweight crinolines back into style. Eugénie faced a lot of criticism from the French, being insulted as the Spaniard, just as Marie Antoinette was called the Austrian. Eugénie morbidly believed she would suffer the same fate as Marie Antoinette. While the Second Empire was thriving in France, the Victorian era was in full swing in England. This era was characteristic of the tiny waist. Fainting couches were invented because so many women tightened their corsets too much, too quickly, causing them to faint. In the 1890s, large bustles returned in style in order to stimulate the French textile industry because large bustles require many extra yards of fabric. This higher neckline top would be worn during the day because it's more modest. While both men and women have been making and designing clothes for centuries, It's predominantly men's voices and ideas that are printed, reproduced, and heard. Charles Worth was the genius behind most trends in the late 19th century. Nowadays, many of the biggest brands like Dior and McQueen are designed or run by men. Men didn't have to wear the tiny slippers they made for women. Men didn't have to wear the layers of petticoats and corsets, and yet they were the ones to design and make them. Today, women all know the struggle of uncomfortable high heels or the lack of pockets in clothes, as fashion continues to be heavily influenced by men. This lower cut top with short poofy sleeves would be worn in the evening to an event. This was the first top where I felt comfortable enough to use the same pattern as the day top and actually alter it myself, according to research. Over the next half-century, corsets will go out of style as women internalize them. No longer does a garment shape our body or our waist. Society has now taught women to strive to reach that shape in our bodies ourselves, through things like diet, exercise, or even plastic surgery. How have you internalized your corset?
Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I was loving looking through the comments in the chat. I'm going to answer some of the questions that were put in there. If you have any other questions, feel free to add them in. I'm still looking at it. So one of the first questions I got was, how did people clean the dresses? I just want to preface this by saying that I'm not a historical expert. I know what I know through just a little bit of through historical research, but it doesn't encompass everything that's out there, obviously. So for cleaning the dresses, I recently read this really interesting article, shout out Angela, you're on here, for sending it to me, about how women would clean the dresses, especially in the 18th century, so the earlier ones that you saw. I read that they would actually unsew, so they would seam rip a lot of the seams, and they would wash the individual pieces of fabric to prevent like shrinkage or wrinkles or things like that. And then they would have to sew it back together. So please let me know if this is absolutely incorrect. But I just thought that was fascinating. The amount of work that you would have to go to just completely wash a garment compared to just what we do today, like throw it in the laundry machine. I got a few questions asking how long it took me to make these, and I kept a little log. So as I said in the thing, it took me 55 hours to make the brown and pink robe à la française. And then that was the first one that I made. And it actually got faster and faster for me to sew, even with different patterns, just as I got more experienced with historical sewing. But in total, everything that you saw, plus a few other garments that I didn't picture, uh, it took me about 250 hours to make in total, which is a lot of time. Silver lining for me was this pandemic has given me a lot more time at home. So I had the time this summer to sew that much, but I know it's a lot of hours. Um, Somebody asked me what fabric I used for the Regency gown. So again, I didn't use the most historically accurate fabrics for all of them just because I don't have the money to pay for that, just because silk is very expensive and I needed many yards of all of these fabrics. So for the Regency gown, which is the first Empire one, so the white one worn by Lena, that one, the outer layer is a synthetic silk rayon chiffon blend. It's very soft to the touch, almost slippery. And then the underlayer is a very stiff cotton. And then Neil asked me about the roses that I added on the evening Belle Epoque dress on the top. And that was just an impromptu thing that I did. I saw a lot of embellishments on the dresses when I was researching them, and I wanted to add something of my own. I actually sewed in beads into the roses to make it sparkle. And what makes it even more meaningful and more special is that the beads were from my late grandmother. So that was it was a really sentimental touch for me. And then I got a few more questions. How did the undergarments change between 1770 and 1890? So they changed a lot. The corset did stay in style, but the shape of the corset changed. So as I said, it was referred to as stays originally in the 18th century. You saw an 18th century stay, or a replica of one that I made at the beginning. And then they became more like what we know as corsets. So the Victorian era, the corsets were definitely more like round on top, and some of them even became strapless. And then undergarments shifted. There was the undergarments shifted from being just shifts to shifts and more pantaloon style, more similar to pants or what we know today. That would be more comfortable than a dress, just that lets everything flow. So I'm not the expert on this, but that's kind of the general change in shape. But it didn't actually drastically change until the 20th century to what we know today as modern undergarments. Somebody asked me if I was going to pursue this as a career. I don't think so, but I mean, you never know. I really enjoy sewing, and I definitely want to continue my historical research, so I can definitely see myself doing more the history side of it as a career. But I definitely will keep sewing. I actually made this top this weekend. Yeah, so we'll see. Somebody also asked me, did you sew all of this at home or in a studio? I sewed all of this at home, just the top floor. I've kind of taken it over. It's just fabric everywhere. And I sewed it all at home. Luckily, there's a fabric store like 2 blocks from my house on Clement Street. And I go there like almost every Sunday now. I'm a regular, so that's kind of fun. My personal form of retail therapy. Yeah, if there doesn't seem to be any other questions, but I really enjoyed sharing this with you. After this, I'm going to drop the higher quality version in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and